We begin in Ukraine, where there have been new strikes on the capital for the second straight day. Ukrainian officials say 3 missiles hit a power facility in Kyiv. Russia is striking critical infrastructure across the country. President Zelensky says 30% of Ukraine's power stations have been destroyed in the past 8 days. There are reports of attacks in the cities of Dnipro and Zhytomyr. The latest attacks came 24 hours after the capital was hit by kamikaze drones. The unmanned drones, believed to be Iranian-made, killed at least 8 people in the capital and the northern city of Sumy, and also struck critical infrastructure, with power outages reported in hundreds of towns and villages.
In Zhytomyr, the mayor said there was no power or water in the city and hospitals were working on backup power.
Today, at 8:40, the enemy struck an energy infrastructure facility in Zhytomyr region. For now, 11 settlements of the region are temporarily cut off electricity. Emergency reconnection to backup grids is ongoing, which will allow to restore the power supply to territorial communities. Fortunately, there are no victims.
In his nightly address, Ukraine's president urged the West to speed up the delivery of air defense systems following those deadly Russian drone strikes. Volodymyr Zelensky also confirmed Ukraine had swapped more than 100 prisoners with Russia in what he says was the first all-female exchange with Moscow since the invasion began in February.
Today's Russian missile and drone fire also caused further power outages, but this is being corrected. Restoration work is ongoing. This form of terror will not give Russia anything even now, when we still do not have a sufficient number of air defense and missile defense systems. But for this our unity must continue to be maximal. The next stage of the release of our people from Russian captivity took place. We managed to free 108 Ukrainian women, officers, sergeants, privates, army, navy, territorial defense, National Guards, Border Guards. 96 are soldiers, 37 of them are evacuees from Azovstal, 12 are civilians.
For more on this, we can now speak to Arise chief correspondent John Cookson, who is monitoring developments from London. Good day, John, and another eventful 24 hours in Ukraine. What's the latest update?
Hi ladies, yes, another busy news day out of Ukraine. Great to be on Newsday, by the way. The situation at the moment is that a number of cities have been hit by cruise missiles and drones, including Kiev, the north of Kiev, where a power plant, a major power plant has been taken out. Over in Kharkiv on the northeast, a similar story. Mykolaiv down in the south, also power plants hit there by drones and cruise missiles. And as you heard from the mayor of Zhytomyr, there's a city of 230,000 people in central Ukraine. They're without water and power at this hour. And Zelensky saying overnight that a third of the power stations have been taken out. Ukraine has been a nation which has supplied electricity to Europe. It's sold electricity, it's power rich, if you like. And I'm just wondering whether, in fact, Europe can help now Ukraine with electricity and reverse the flow. I don't know, that's just my speculation. But clearly this is a new phase of the war, unable to beat the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Putin now attacking infrastructure and including these vital power plants and water plants across Ukraine. Like the drones themselves, not a huge military asset for the Russians, but the devastation and the impact that it has on the ground is huge. For to be without water and electricity has a massive impact on the city, of course, and it will be some days before power supplies can be restored. So this is clearly a new development in this nearly 8 months long war that Putin is waging against the Ukrainians.
Indeed. Now, John, some Western governments want sanctions imposed on Iran for supplying Russia with those, kamikaze drones, as they're called. Is that going to happen?
Just a bit of background on this. The cruise missile cost the Russians between 1 million and 30 million to fire each one. Now, these drones, the Russians have bought hundreds, $20,000 each only from the Iranians. So, for dollar, it's worth the Russians using drones in their attack. It's much cheaper, and it has, as we've seen, a huge impact on the ground. Now, the point about sanctions is that this goes back to the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, and under that, the Iranians are forbidden to deal with weapons of these kind, like drones, until 2023. They can't buy and they can't sell. They have a huge arms industry themselves, but under the terms of the the 2015 agreement, they signed, and they're not allowed under that to deal in these kind of ammunitions. If they do, and it's clear that they have, then in theory, sanctions can be slapped back on again against the Iranians. Now, the Iranians deny absolutely that they're supplying Russia with these drones, and really it's up to the Western governments to prove that the drones that the Russians are using did indeed come from Iran, and that might be a difficult task.
Absolutely does sound like a daunting task. Now let's take a look at the prisoner swaps. We seem to be seeing them increasing in size with time, and the latest one being the largest one, and an all-female one for that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and these prisoner swaps give me hope, observing a desperate situation between Russia and Ukraine, because these only come about through negotiation, through goodwill. So when all seems bleak and dismal about the progress of the war, there must be back channels in operation now between Kiev and Moscow to bring about these prisoner swaps. The one yesterday was 101 Ukrainian women exchanged for 110 Russian women, and this all comes from the siege of Mariupol earlier this year in May. No one perhaps knew in the wider world that there were women soldiers and police officers and security people on the ground, but they were captured. They have been held in jails in the respective countries, and they are now free. And it follows last month's freedom for male fighters from that same area of conflict being swapped last month, some 80 or so from Russia and Ukraine. And that was a bargain struck between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. They act as mediators. Now, we don't know whether Saudi Arabia and Turkey acted as mediators in this prisoner swap, but nevertheless, who cares? The point is that at least they're talking to each other, and that there's enough goodwill, despite everything, for these prisoners to be swapped and to be reunited with their families.
Well, John, do you think the calls by the Ukrainian president for the international community to, hasten with their response for the country's needs, do you think that his calls would actually lead to that reaction that he's expecting?
Look, Europe and America have problems of their own at the moment, not least the UK, which has got a government in crisis, is on the brink of recession. We've been told that there might be power cuts in January. America facing the midterm elections, on the brink of recession, not falling into recession, but pretty close. Germany too, and other nations in Europe having a bit of a tough time of it at the moment. And they make all sorts of promises to the Ukrainians, some of which are not fulfilled. So Zelensky, he's pleased for greater backup for air defenses, might well fall on deaf ears at this time, only for the reasons that I've just stated, that Europe and America have huge domestic problems of their own. That won't stop Zelensky making these repeated calls for better air defense systems. And indeed, the UK, America and Germany have agreed to supply, but they, apart from one from Germany, they haven't materialized yet.
Now, on the backdrop of that, of course, we're hearing news that a Russian fighter jet had an accident. What's the mood like concerning this? Is this encouraging news at all for the West, who are hoping and praying that Russian forces are getting weaker and weaker?
That accident seems to have been, it was near the border with Ukraine, but seems to have been an accident. The pilot himself actually managed to bail out, parachute out before impact of the crash. And the suspicion is that it might have been brought down by a Ukrainian missile. That seems to have been ruled out now, that it was a terrible accident. I mean, sometimes aircraft do fall out of the sky and hit civilian areas, that indeed this happened in this particular case. It's all part of the general nervousness about the region. The whole place is a powder keg at the moment, and people try to look into Putin's mind and decide what he's going to do next, and he remains an enigma. And then on the other hand, you have Zelensky, who has at the moment the West on his side. But as I said earlier, the West has problems of its own. Winter is approaching. On the plus side, and just mentioning winter there, the war will draw down a little bit as the winter months start to impact on the region. Already it's quite cold in certain parts of Ukraine. And, if there is any light at the end of the tunnel, maybe a winter shutdown of the war will bring about the prospect of peace, but that's just speculation at the moment.
Fantastic analysis, as always. Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson, thank you for joining us on News.